The vast expanse of space stretched before the UES Pioneer, humanity's most advanced deep space vessel, as it glided through the uncharted regions of the Carina Arm. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the bridge's observation window, her dark eyes reflecting the distant stars as she contemplated their mission to find other intelligent life in the galaxy. "Captain, we're detecting unusual energy signatures," Lieutenant Marcus Wong reported from his station, his fingers dancing across the holographic display. "They're unlike anything in our database." Sarah straightened, her attention immediately focused. After 6 months of exploration, they might have finally found something significant. Analysis. "The energy patterns suggest advanced technology, far beyond our current capabilities," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with excitement and apprehension. "They're concentrated around the 4th planet of the system ahead." "Take us in, but maintain distance," Sarah ordered. "Full sensor sweep. Let's see what we're dealing with." As the Pioneer approached, the planet came into view, a massive gas giant surrounded by what appeared to be artificial structures. The structures gleamed with an otherworldly precision, their surfaces reflecting starlight in perfect geometric patterns. "Captain," Communications Officer Zara Patel's voice cut through the tension on the bridge. "We're receiving a transmission. It's structured in pure mathematics." Sarah nodded. First contact protocols had prepared them for this possibility. "Run it through the universal translator. Let's see if we can establish communication." The ship's AI worked rapidly, analyzing the mathematical patterns and converting them into something comprehensible. After several tense minutes, the main view screen activated, revealing a being that seemed to be composed of pure energy, its form shifting in precise, crystalline patterns. "Unidentified vessel." The beam's thoughts translated directly into words. "You have entered Nexus space. Your primitive propulsion signature has been detected. Explain your presence." Sarah stepped forward, maintaining her composure despite the implied insult. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Pioneer. We are peaceful explorers seeking contact with other intelligent species." The beam's form pulsed with what might have been curiosity or disgust. It was impossible to tell. "Scanning your vessel now. Warning, your technology relies on organic neural networks for decision-making. This is inefficient and dangerous. We call it human intuition." Sarah replied carefully, "And it has served us well." "Unacceptable." The beam's response came sharply. "Your species operates on emotional responses rather than pure logic. This is a contamination risk to ordered space. You will be eliminated." Before Sarah could respond, multiple vessels materialized around the Pioneer, their forms as geometrically perfect as the structures orbiting the gas giant. Each ship moved with incredible precision, forming a perfect containment pattern. "All hands, battle stations," Sarah commanded, her training kicking in despite the shock of the situation. Evasive maneuvers. The Pioneer's engines roared to life as it dove and twisted through space, avoiding the first wave of energy weapons from the Nexus ships. The human vessel's movements were erratic, guided by the instincts of its pilot rather than calculated trajectories. "Their weapons are cutting through our shields like they're not even there," Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the dire situation. "But, Captain, they're missing more often than they should. Their targeting seems to assume we'll follow optimal flight paths." Sarah grabbed her command chair as the ship shuddered under a glancing hit. "They expect us to behave logically," she realized. "Helm, forget everything you know about proper evasive patterns. Fly like you're in a simulator with zero consequences." The Pioneer's pilot, Lieutenant James Rodriguez, grinned despite the situation. "You mean fly crazy? I can do that, Captain." The ship lurched into a series of maneuvers that defied conventional space combat doctrine. Instead of following predictable evasion patterns, Rodriguez let his instincts guide the ship's movement, creating chaos that the perfectly logical Nexus ships struggled to counter. "It's working," Zara called out. "Their targeting systems can't predict our movement patterns." Sarah watched as the Nexus ships attempted to adjust their perfect formation to deal with the Pioneer's unpredictable flight path. Their movements remained precise, mathematical, and that was their weakness. They couldn't comprehend, let alone counter, the human tendency to act on gut instinct rather than pure logic. "Plot a course out of here," Sarah ordered. "We need to warn Earth. The galaxy isn't as empty as we thought, and not everyone out there is friendly." As the Pioneer prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Sarah observed the Nexus ships still trying to form their perfect attack patterns. In their quest for absolute logic, they had lost something essential: the ability to adapt, to think outside established patterns, to embrace the chaos that was inherent in real combat situations. The ship made the jump, leaving the Nexus vessels behind, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Humanity's first contact had turned into a potential war, but they had inadvertently discovered something crucial. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in being unpredictable, in embracing the very qualities that other species might consider primitive or chaotic. As the Pioneer raced back to Earth, Sarah began preparing her report. Humanity needed to prepare for what was coming, but they also needed to understand their unique advantage. The Nexus might have superior technology, but they had just encountered something their perfect logic couldn't handle: human unpredictability. The war that was coming wouldn't be won with superior technology or perfect battle formations. It would be won with the one thing the Nexus couldn't comprehend or replicate: human nature itself. The emergence of the UES Pioneer from hyperspace sent ripples of excitement through Earth's orbital defense station. Within hours, the station's briefing room was packed with military leaders and scientists, all eyes fixed on Captain Sarah Chen as she presented the sensor data from their encounter with the Nexus. "Their technology is far beyond ours," Sarah explained, gesturing to the holographic display showing the crystalline Nexus ships. "But during our escape, we discovered something interesting." She played the combat footage, highlighting the Pioneer's erratic, evasive maneuvers. Dr. Elena Santos, Earth's leading genotechnologist, leaned forward in her seat. "Their ships move with perfect mathematical precision, but they couldn't handle your unpredictable flight patterns." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Their targeting systems are based on logical predictions. When we didn't follow expected patterns, they couldn't adapt fast enough." Admiral Victor Torres, his weathered face grave, spoke up. "One ship surviving through unpredictable movements is one thing, Captain, but we can't base Earth's defense strategy on chaos." "Actually, we can," a new voice interrupted. All heads turned to see Dr. David Nash, head of the Neural Combat Systems Division, striding into the room. "And we must. I've analyzed the Nexus sensor data, and I believe I understand why they consider us primitive." He pulled up his own display, showing neural pattern analyses. "The Nexus operates on pure logic. Every decision calculated, every movement precisely planned. But human brains," he grinned, "we're wonderfully messy. We make intuitive leaps, we act on hunches, we do things that defy logical explanation but somehow work." "You're suggesting we weaponize human unpredictability?" Admiral Torres asked skeptically. "I'm suggesting we embrace it," Nash replied. "Traditional military doctrine is about discipline, order, precise formations. But against an enemy that operates on pure logic, those very principles make us predictable." The room erupted in debate, but Sarah noticed Dr. Santos studying the Nexus ship scans with intense concentration. "Doctor, you look like you've had an idea." "Their technology," Elena murmured. "It's perfect, too perfect. Every system optimized for maximum efficiency, every response calculated for optimal results. But that level of optimization—" She looked up, eyes bright with realization. "It leaves no room for improvisation." Over the next weeks, Earth's military underwent a radical transformation. Under the combined guidance of Nash and Santos, traditional combat doctrines were torn apart and rebuilt from the ground up. Pilots were trained to trust their instincts over computer-suggested flight paths. Tactical officers were encouraged to make snap decisions based on gut feelings rather than probability calculations. In simulator after simulator, human crews faced off against AI opponents programmed to think like the Nexus. The results were startling. When humans tried to fight conventionally, they lost every time. But when they embraced unpredictability, when they acted on instinct and emotion rather than tactical doctrine, they achieved the impossible. It goes against everything we know about space combat. Admiral Torres admitted, watching a training session where a pilot successfully evaded computer-predicted targeting by literally closing their eyes and flying by feel. But it works. Because we're not just training them to be unpredictable, Nash explained. We're training them to tap into something the Nexus can't understand. Human intuition. That moment when you know something without knowing how you know it. That's our edge. Sarah, observing the training alongside them, added, the Nexus called our reliance on neural networks, on human decision-making, primitive. But they don't understand that what they see as a weakness is actually our greatest strength. Elena joined them, carrying new sensor analyses. And it gets better. Look at these readings from their weapon systems. They're incredibly advanced, but they're designed to counter logical defenses. When our shields fluctuate randomly, when our ships move in ways that make no tactical sense, their targeting systems actually become less effective. We're not just preparing for war, Nash realized. We're redefining what war means. The Nexus expects perfection, optimization, logical responses. We'll give them chaos, intuition, and human unpredictability. The warning came 3 weeks later. Long-range sensors detected a Nexus fleet approaching the outer solar system. But Earth was ready, or as ready as they could be. The defending fleet assembled, not in the precise formations of traditional space combat, but in loose, seemingly random groupings that could shift and adapt at a moment's notice. As Sarah took command of the newly commissioned UES Defiant, she looked out at the assembled ships. They weren't the most advanced vessels in the galaxy, but they carried something the Nexus couldn't calculate or counter: the human spirit, with all its beautiful imperfections and illogical brilliance. All ships, she broadcast to the fleet, remember your training. Don't think about what the tactical computer says is the right move. Think about what feels right. Trust your instincts. The Nexus believes they're superior because they've eliminated emotion and intuition from their decision-making. Let's show them exactly how powerful those primitive qualities can be. The fleet acknowledged, each crew ready to prove that humanity's greatest perceived weakness, their emotional, intuitive nature, was about to become their greatest strength against an enemy that had forgotten how to be anything but perfect. The Nexus fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their crystalline ships arranging themselves in mathematically perfect attack formations. 300 vessels strong, they presented a sight that should have terrified the human defenders. Instead, Captain Sarah Chen felt a surge of anticipation as she watched from the bridge of the UES Defiant. They're exactly as predicted, Dr. Elena Santos observed from her temporary station on the bridge. Perfect geometric patterns, optimal spacing for maximum tactical advantage. According to their calculations, at least. All ships maintain random distribution protocols. Sarah broadcast to the human fleet. Remember your training. Don't think about what you should do. Think about what they won't expect you to do. The human fleet hung in space in what appeared to be complete disorder. Ships faced different directions, maintained irregular spacing, and seemed to drift without purpose. To the Nexus, it must have looked like chaos. To the humans, it was their greatest advantage. The Nexus transmitted their message across all frequencies. Your tactical deployment is illogical and inefficient. Surrender now and accept elimination with dignity. Sarah smiled. All ships, execute Operation Chaos. What happened next defied conventional space combat logic. Instead of forming up into traditional attack patterns, the human fleet exploded into motion like a disturbed swarm of insects. Each ship moved independently, following their crew's instincts rather than tactical computer suggestions. The Nexus fleet opened fire, their advanced weapons lancing out with deadly precision, at where human ships should have been. But the human vessels were never where logic dictated they should be. They twisted, turned, and accelerated in ways that made no tactical sense, yet somehow worked. Their targeting systems are struggling, Elena reported, studying her readings. They're still trying to predict our movements based on optimal response patterns. But there are no patterns to predict. The battle devolved into something that had never been seen in the history of space warfare. The Nexus ships maintained their perfect formations, their weapons firing with incredible precision, while the human fleet moved like a chaotic dance, each ship following its own unpredictable path, while somehow maintaining a cohesive strategy. On the Defiance Bridge, Lieutenant Rodriguez had his eyes closed as he piloted, letting pure instinct guide his actions. "This shouldn't work," he muttered, as the ship spiraled through a gap in the Nexus formation that their computers had deemed too small to navigate. "By every rule of space combat, this should be suicide." "That's exactly why it does work," Dr. Nash replied from his station, where he was monitoring the neural response patterns of the fleet's crews. "They can't counter what they can't comprehend, and they fundamentally cannot comprehend intuitive decision-making." The first Nexus ship fell to human weapons fire, its perfect defenses unable to adapt to attacks that came from illogical angles with irregular timing. Then another fell, and another. The human fleet was taking losses too, but far fewer than any tactical simulation had predicted. "They're trying to adapt," Elena announced, excitement in her voice. "Look at their formations. They're attempting to incorporate randomness into their movements, but they're doing it mathematically, trying to calculate unpredictability." "You can't calculate true randomness," Nash responded. "That's what they don't understand. Real unpredictability comes from emotion, from instinct, from the beautiful chaos of the human mind." The battle raged for hours, becoming increasingly bizarre as the Nexus attempted to adapt to human tactics while still maintaining their fundamental reliance on logic and calculation. Their ships would make sudden moves that seemed random, but were actually based on complex algorithms, making them predictable to human intuition in a way that pure logic could never understand. "Their flagship is showing unusual energy readings," Elena reported suddenly. I think they're actually trying to modify their tactical systems in real time. They're attempting to learn from us." Sarah watched as the Nexus flagship's movements became slightly less rigid, slightly more unpredictable. "They're beginning to understand," she said softly. "But understanding chaos isn't the same as embracing it." The turning point came 7 hours into the battle. The Nexus fleet, having lost nearly a third of their ships to seemingly impossible attacks from illogical angles, began to show signs of genuine disarray. Their perfect formations wavered as human ships darted through gaps that shouldn't have existed, attacked from vectors that violated tactical doctrine, and succeeded through moves that no computer would ever suggest. "They're breaking," Nash announced. "Their tactical networks are showing signs of overload. They can't process what we're doing because they can't accept that it works." Sarah opened a channel to all human ships. "Push the advantage. Don't let them reestablish their patterns. Show them that perfection isn't always perfect." The human fleet surged forward, their apparent chaos concealing a deeper order born of shared purpose and trained instinct. Ships weaved between Nexus energy beams, turned impossible corners, and struck from blind spots that only human intuition could have discovered. When the Nexus fleet finally retreated, their perfect formations shattered. They left behind more than just destroyed ships. They left behind a fundamental challenge to their entire worldview. The idea that perhaps perfection wasn't the ultimate goal. Perhaps there was power in imperfection, in the beautiful chaos of emotional, intuitive beings who could act without calculating every possibility. As the human fleet regrouped, Sarah received a transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Torres's voice carried both pride and wonder. "Captain Chen, do you realize what you've just proven? You've shown that humanity's greatest perceived weakness, our emotional, intuitive nature, might actually be our greatest strength. Sarah looked out at her fleet, ships moving in their seemingly random patterns that somehow made perfect sense to the human mind. "No, Admiral," she replied. "We've proven something even more important. We've proven that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't perfect logic. It's the beautiful unpredictability of the human spirit." Deep within the crystalline chambers of the Nexus Command Center, First Observer Vex studied the battle recordings with growing fascination. The human ships moved in ways that defied tactical analysis, their actions governed by something the Nexus had long ago abandoned: intuition. "Their behavior patterns are concerning," Second Observer Krill noted, their crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "They achieve success through methods that violate all principles of optimal combat doctrine." "Perhaps," Vex responded, their form shifting thoughtfully. "That is precisely why they succeed. We have become so focused on perfection that we have forgotten the power of adaptation." In the 3 months since their first major defeat, the Nexus had been struggling to understand human combat tactics. Their attempts to incorporate randomness into their own strategies had failed because they approached unpredictability as a mathematical problem to be solved. Meanwhile, aboard the UES Defiant, Captain Sarah Chen was facing challenges of her own. "They're learning," she told her assembled officers, showing tactical data from recent skirmishes. "The Nexus ships are starting to display more flexible behavior patterns." Dr. Elena Santos nodded, pulling up her latest analysis. "They're trying to replicate our unpredictability, but they're doing it through increasingly complex algorithms. It's still predictable, just harder to predict." "Then we need to evolve too," Dr. Nash interjected. "We've been relying on pure instinct and unpredictability. Maybe it's time we combine that with something they won't expect: their own precision." The idea was revolutionary. Instead of just acting unpredictably, human ships would alternate between chaos and precise geometric formations. The switch between patterns would itself be governed by human intuition, creating a level of uncertainty that even the Nexus's advancing adaptation couldn't counter. As both sides prepared for what they knew would be a decisive battle, the nature of the conflict had fundamentally changed. It was no longer simply chaos versus order. It had become a battle of adaptation itself. The Nexus fleet that arrived at the edge of the Sol system was different from before. Their ships still moved with incredible precision, but now they incorporated elements of unpredictability in their formations. It wasn't true randomness, but it was a clear sign that they were evolving. "All ships, prepare for engagement," Sarah broadcast to the human fleet. "Execute protocol synthesis. Trust your instincts about when to maintain formation and when to break it." The battle that followed would redefine space combat forever. Human ships would snap into perfect geometric formations, matching the Nexus's precision, only to explode into chaos at the exact moment the enemy adjusted their targeting solutions. The Nexus ships responded by attempting their own unpredictable maneuvers, creating a dance of order and chaos that was beautiful in its complexity. "Their flagship's energy signature is fluctuating," Elena reported during a particularly intense exchange. "It's almost as if they're trying to mimic our neural pattern responses." The Nexus had indeed made a breakthrough. By studying human battle recordings, they had begun to understand that true adaptability required more than just complex algorithms. Their ships started displaying behavior that seemed almost intuitive, though still bound by the constraints of their logical nature. "Remarkable," Nash observed, watching the tactical display. "They're learning to be unpredictable, but they're doing it in their own way. Not through emotion or instinct, but through increasingly sophisticated pattern analysis." The battle raged for hours, both sides adapting and counter-adapting. Human ships would discover a new way to be unpredictable, and the Nexus would develop a counter, only for the humans to switch to perfect precision when it was least expected. On the Nexus flagship, First Observer Vex made a decision that would change the course of the war. "Initiate the synthesis protocols," they commanded. Let us see if we can truly understand these humans. The Nexus ships suddenly began moving in ways that seemed almost organic, their formations flowing between order and chaos in a way that mimicked human unpredictability, while maintaining their technological superiority. They're not just adapting anymore, Sarah realized, watching the display. They're evolving. They're learning to combine their precision with something like our intuition. But even as the Nexus ships demonstrated their new capabilities, Sarah saw something else, an opportunity. The very fact that they were trying to understand human unpredictability meant they were opening themselves to new ways of thinking. All ships, she commanded, execute final protocol. The human fleet responded with a maneuver that even their own tactical officers hadn't predicted. Every ship moved in perfect synchronization, forming a precise geometric pattern that would have made the Nexus proud. And then, at the exact same moment, every ship chose its own unique vector of attack. The result was devastating. The Nexus ships, caught between expecting either human chaos or perfect order, couldn't adapt fast enough to this combination of both. Their formations broke, their targeting systems overwhelmed by the impossibility of predicting actions that were simultaneously perfectly coordinated and completely random. As the battle began to turn decisively in humanity's favor, First Observer Vex made another unprecedented decision. They opened a direct communication channel to the defiant Captain Chen. Vex's translated voice carried a new tone, something almost like respect. We have spent millennia perfecting our civilization, eliminating what we saw as the inefficiencies of emotion and intuition. But you have shown us something we had forgotten. That true perfection includes the ability to be imperfect. The battle ended not with a decisive victory, but with something far more significant, the first step toward understanding between two fundamentally different ways of thinking. The Nexus had begun to grasp the value of human unpredictability, while humanity had learned to appreciate the power of precision. The Great Hall of the Earth Nexus Conference Center represented something that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Crystalline Nexus beings moved among humans, their forms shimmering as they engaged in discussions that bridged the gap between pure logic and intuitive understanding. Captain Sarah Chen stood beside First Observer Vex, watching as Dr. Elena Santos demonstrated her latest breakthrough to an audience of both species. On the central holographic display, a human ship and a Nexus vessel moved in perfect synchronization, each incorporating elements of the other's tactical doctrine. 6 months ago, we were trying to destroy each other, Sarah remarked. Now we're creating hybrid combat doctrines together. Vex's crystalline form pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as agreement. We sought perfection through the elimination of chaos. You showed us that true perfection includes the ability to embrace uncertainty. The breakthrough had come in the aftermath of the battle for Sol. The Nexus, humbled by their inability to counter human unpredictability, had begun to question their fundamental assumptions about the nature of advancement. Meanwhile, humanity had discovered that their chaotic nature became even more powerful when tempered with elements of Nexus precision. Dr. Nash joined them, carrying new neural pattern analyses. The latest tests are remarkable, he reported. When we integrate Nexus logic systems with human intuitive interfaces, we get something entirely new. The systems aren't just combining. They're evolving into something greater than either approach alone. On the display, Elena was showing how human neural patterns could be used to introduce controlled uncertainty into Nexus targeting systems, while Nexus computational precision could help guide human intuitive responses. The result was a hybrid approach that neither civilization could have developed alone. There was an old human philosopher, Sarah said, who argued that thesis and antithesis come together to create synthesis. We were order and chaos, logic and intuition, precision and unpredictability. Now we're becoming something more. The evidence of this synthesis was everywhere. Nexus ships now incorporated human-designed uncertainty engines in their tactical systems, allowing them to tap into controlled chaos when pure logic proved insufficient. Human vessels carried Nexus precision matrices that helped channel their unpredictability into more effective patterns. But the changes went far beyond military applications. The Nexus had begun to experiment with incorporating emotional responses into their decision-making processes, discovering that intuition could sometimes find solutions that pure logic missed. Humans, in turn, learned to appreciate the beauty of perfect precision and the power of thoroughly calculated actions. We have detected another spacefaring civilization approaching Nexus space, Vex announced suddenly. Their technology suggests a purely emotional, instinct-driven species with no appreciation for logical progression. Sarah smiled. A few months ago, you would have seen them as primitive and moved to eliminate them. Yes, Vex agreed, their form shifting thoughtfully. Now we understand that their approach, while different from ours, may offer new perspectives we have yet to consider. Perhaps you would consider joining us in making first contact. A joint first contact mission between human and Nexus representatives. Sarah considered the idea. Combining our different approaches to create a more complete understanding. I think that's exactly what both our civilizations need. Dr. Nash cleared his throat. The neural pattern study suggests that the very act of trying to understand each other has changed both our species. The Nexus are developing the capacity for intuitive leaps, while humans are becoming more capable of precise, logical analysis. Evolution through understanding, Elena added, joining their discussion after concluding her presentation. We're not just learning from each other, we're growing into something new, something that takes the best of both approaches. As if to demonstrate this evolution, a mixed group of human and Nexus students entered the hall, engaged in what appeared to be a heated debate about the relative merits of logical deduction versus intuitive problem-solving. The Nexus students were displaying clear signs of emotional engagement, while the humans were supporting their arguments with precise mathematical proofs. This is what real advancement looks like, Sarah observed. Not the elimination of differences, but the synthesis of seemingly opposing approaches into something greater. Vex's form brightened in agreement. We sought to perfect ourselves by eliminating chaos and emotion. You showed us that true perfection lies in the balance between order and chaos, logic and intuition, certainty and uncertainty. And you showed us that our unpredictability becomes even more powerful when guided by precise understanding. Sarah replied. Together, we're becoming something neither of us could have been alone. As they watched the continued interactions between their peoples, both leaders understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the galaxy, the birth of a new way of thinking that combined the best aspects of two fundamentally different approaches to existence. The great conflict between human chaos and Nexus order hadn't ended in the victory of one side over the other, but in the realization that both approaches had their place. That true advancement came not from eliminating differences, but from learning to combine them in new and powerful ways. As preparations began for the joint first contact mission, Sarah reflected that perhaps this had been inevitable from the moment humans and the Nexus first met. Sometimes the greatest achievements don't come from defeating an enemy, but from learning to understand them. And in doing so, learning to understand ourselves better as well. The future that stretched before them was neither purely logical nor purely chaotic, but a beautiful synthesis of both. And in that synthesis lay possibilities that neither civilization had imagined before they learned to see the universe through each other's eyes.